Did the dealership just quote you an absurd amount of money to replace the radiator on your Porsche Macan? It's really not that bad. My name's Cole from FCP Euro, and today we're going to show you how to replace this radiator on your first generation Porsche Macan. In front of us, we have the Nissan's radiator kit assembled for the first generation Porsche Macan behind us. Now, we chose to go with this kit because this is an aftermarket kit with great quality and we can save a little bit money where we can. Now, this kit includes all of the hardware that we're going to need to install this radiator and some Zurex G40 coolant. One thing that is not included in this kit is some transmission fluid because we are going to have to disconnect the transcooler from this radiator because it has a core inside of it. So whatever transmission fluid you have filled your transmission with, grab 2 liters of fluid so you can top it off later. Now, some symptoms that may indicate that you have to check your radiator for replacement include on the dash, this vehicle will tell you if it has a low coolant level light, if you have a cooling system performance issue, or if your vehicle is overheating. Now, you want to check the coolant level if you have those symptoms. However, the radiator itself can leak from a couple of places. It can leak from the fittings here, it can leak from the end tanks, it could have actual leaks on the core itself, or it can be blocked by a bunch of road debris. So you really need to check your vehicle and see what is going on first before you order and replace one of these radiators. Now, Porsche states that you have to check the cooling system level every 10,000 miles or 1 year, which they don't really recommend replacing the radiator in that service interval. However, here at FCP Euro, we recommend replacing this radiator anywhere from 30 to 100,000 miles, but it really depends on your driving conditions and the condition of the vehicle itself. Now, one other thing that FCP Euro recommends doing is changing the coolant in the cooling system every 4 years and every 40,000 miles because this coolant does degrade over time, and when it degrades, it can cause blockages in the cooling system. So be a little bit proactive, change the coolant out, and ensure that this system is functioning properly. One thing that we carry at FCP Euro but is not pictured on this table is the coolant hoses for this vehicle. Typically, you do not have to replace them, but if you have a damaged connection, the only way that we can fix that is by replacing the coolant hoses. So if you need those, head over to fcpeuro.com, enter your vehicle, check our vehicle applicator, and see what coolant hoses fit your vehicle. Now that we've gone over everything on the table, let's get into the tools that we're going to need for this DIY. We will need an arrangement of sockets including 13mm, 10mm, 7mm, T30, T25, 10mm Allen, and some adapters. You'll need some torque wrenches ranging from 10 Newton meters all the way up to 160 Newton meters, a couple different size of ratchets, some pliers including hose clamp pliers, some 90-degree picks, a flathead screwdriver, a trim panel popper, a pry bar, a soft blow hammer, some compressed air, a vacuum fill tool, a fluid pump, and a scan tool that can read transmission temperatures. Some optional things on the table include some power tools from Bosch. We have a vacuum, electric screwdriver, and electric ratchet here. Some ratcheting tethers definitely make things easier. Some safety equipment including safety glasses and hearing protection, and some lubricant and brake clean to clean the job up. Not pictured on the table is going to be a drain vessel to capture all the coolant and transmission fluid from the radiator. As you'll see behind us, our vehicle is already in service position, so these tools are only pertaining to replacing the radiator. And with that, let's get into this DIY. As you can see, our Porsche Macan is already in service position, and that is a requirement for that job. We've already made a video on that, so click that link down in the description below. But now let's get into it. The first thing that we're going to have to do is open that coolant bottle and drain the transmission lines from the radiator. So we're going to grab some drain pans to place them underneath here to catch all of that fluid. So we've already disconnected one of the lines that is required when putting this into service position, but we are going to pull this cap off so the coolant can drain from the system nicely. Over on the passenger side, there are going to be 2 different transmission cooler lines, and they are marked from the factory. This blue line goes to the left, and the non-marked line goes to the right. We are going to have to remove those by pressing in these tabs and then pushing forward a little bit and pulling them off. This can be a tricky process, so just be patient. These will drain out a little bit of transmission fluid, so we have a drain pan underneath to catch it. There we go. Now let's raise the vehicle so we can drain the coolant from the lower radiator hose. Most modern European vehicles do not have a drain fitting on the lower radiator, but Porsche decided to bless us, and they put one of these screws on the lower radiator hose. So we can use a flathead screwdriver, rotate this outwards to drain the coolant from the system. Be careful, this can be very brittle, and if it does not come out smoothly like this screw is right now, you may want to remove that lower radiator hose from the radiator. We are going to let all the coolant drain out of the vehicle, and then we'll be right back. One thing to point out, this is our coolant temp sensor on the lower radiator hose, and the seal for that can leak. You can buy that seal separately, and it's linked in the description below. Now that the coolant has come to a small drip here, we can take a 90-degree pick, get underneath of this clip that holds the lower radiator hose on, remove it all together to make it a little bit easier, and then pull this fitting off. These can be stubborn, so just be gentle with them. They are made out of plastic, and over time, they can become brittle. If you do break this, you will have to replace the whole hose, and that can be found at fcpro.com. So we're just going to wiggle this slowly, use a little bit of prying motion, and get this lower hose off. There we go. Now let's go up top and remove the top piece of that core support. Now there are a bunch of adjustments on this core support, so before removing any of the hardware, we want to take a paint pen and mark the outside of the bolts to mark the position of where they sit. So we're just going to do that now before we touch any of this hardware. Now we also want to mark the positions of where the latch sits on these brackets. And this is just so we mark all of the hardware where it's sitting, so we have to adjust minimally later. Taking a T30 bit, we are going to remove all this hardware holding on these front wings on both sides. There's going to be 2 screws here at the ends. Now, one thing to mention here, there are some washers that are behind here, and we do not want to lose those. So what we can do to not lose these is take some tape and tape them onto the core support. We can now remove the 10 bolts that hold this upper cover on. Be careful, there are different lengths and sizes of bolts, so just note where they came from. We are going to be using a T30 socket for the outside bolts and then a T25 for these inner ones. With all of that hardware removed, we will take a flathead screwdriver, push this pin inwards, and then remove these dowel pins holding this on to the upper radiator mounts. There's going to be one on the other side. Now with those pins removed, we can slide the radiator backwards and then pull this up and slide it out of these 2 front tabs here in this air duct. There's going to be a wire holder attached to this upper piece, which we can just pull right off from the bottom. Now that we have a little bit more room here, we can come and disconnect the hood latches from the electrical connectors right here. So push this locking tab down, we can slide that connector forward, and then disconnect electrical connectors on both sides. Now this can come out as one piece. Once this upper core is off, we want to remove the radiator flaps from the front here and this air duct so we can pull the front air duct off the radiator. You are going to see that we are going to continue to paint mark all of our hardware because there is adjustment on all of this. And we want to align it up the best way possible from where we took it off. Using a T30 bit, we are going to remove these 2 bolts that hold this shutter on. With those bolts removed, we can pull this back, remove the electrical connector from the back here. Once this is pulled back, we are going to release that locking tab for the active grille shutter motor. This motor is actually really prone to failing, and we are going to have a DIY on replacing this later on. But for now, we're going to just disconnect this electrical connector and remove this whole assembly. With the active grille shutter out of the way, we want to start removing this bumper support here, and we are going to want to mark these brackets up top at their position because this is adjustable. We can also mark where this bumper sits in this frame rail bracket. Now you're going to want to come over to these horns and disconnect the electrical connector from it. There's going to be another horn on the other side. With the horn disconnected, we can come and pop this wire holder out of the bracket. There's going to be another wire holder on the other side. Now, pushing these guides out of the way by just pushing the clip off of this little mount here, we can take a 13mm socket and remove the 4 bolts that hold this crash bar on. We can remove these brackets as well, and we're just going to label them driver and passenger. There's going to be a wire holder on the back that we can remove as well. Now, before we can remove this bumper piece, we have to pull these plastic tabs off the foam in the front here. So we'll just pull that down. Looks like this one has already been ripped off. You can glue this back. Now we can counter hold the core support, pull on one side, and then pull on the other side. There we go. Now, if it's a little hard to remove that crash bar or that bumper support, you can use a pry bar to get behind it to help it pry out of these aluminum frame rails. Now, with that out of the way, we need to pull this air guide off the front of the radiator. And you'll see there's a bunch of wiring and hoses connected to it, so we are going to have to pull them off so we can pull this piece out. We will start by disconnecting all of the wiring harness from the wire holders below this frame rail, and then start disconnecting everything off of the radiator duct here, or called the air guide. With that removed, we can now take this whole harness and lay it over here to the side. We will come back over to this connection for the headlight washers, pull this clip off, and then disconnect this as well. Now we will have to disconnect this upper portion of this air duct from this guide, so we are going to rotate the guide where this tab lines up here like this, and then we will pull upwards on this to pull that out and set it to the side. We'll repeat that process on the other side. Now with the top piece disconnected, we can pull this out of the bottom section. And you'll see there's that tab where we have to line that up so we can pull this out. Now on the upper section of this air duct, you'll see that there's locking tabs that hold this in. There's going to be 2 per side. So taking a flathead screwdriver, you will press down, pull out slightly, and then do the same for the lower one. With one side released, we can come over to the other side and do the same. Now, as you can see here, there is a lot of debris behind all the air ducts, and you want to clean all this out while you remove this radiator. It is very important to also clean the condenser with some compressed air to get everything out of there as well, because all of the blockages impede our cooling performance. So we're just going to spend a little bit of time here to get all these leaves out, and then we'll continue with this DIY. Now we can take these foam pieces out and set them to the side and reinstall them later. Taking a T30 bit, we can remove this screw right here that holds this lower guide on, and look at that. Mother Nature was very nice to us, and this vehicle has spent its life on the East Coast, so corrosion and rust is not our best friend here. With that screw removed, or if it snaps like us, we can grab a flathead screwdriver, depress this tab on the passenger side, and start working this out. And since that screw sheared off, we can just pull that out like that and then slide it upwards. At this point, we need to remove our condenser from the radiator, and Porsche wants you to disconnect the lines here. However, we can keep them connected, slide it up, and just set it to the side gently. So with a flathead screwdriver, we will depress these tabs right here. There's one. And then after that's depressed, we will slightly pull this upwards. And then repeat that process on the other side. Now there will have to be a little bit of finagling here, but just be very gentle with all these lines. There we go. Now you can leave this right here. Just be really gentle not to bend anything or damage any of these fins. Coming back over to the driver's side here, we can grab a flathead screwdriver or a 90-degree pick, get underneath of these clips, and remove these two coolant fittings. Now there's going to be one up top here that is a line that goes to our bleed assembly. We're just going to work this off, and now we can remove that upper radiator hose. Again, just work very slowly, wiggle these coolant fittings off. There we go. Using a 10mm socket, we are going to remove this top bolt that holds down these fittings to the AT lines for the transmission. Now the final thing holding these lower radiator bushings in is these two T30 screws per side. So there's one up in the front here, and then there's going to be one right underneath right there. Repeat that process on the other side. We will have to take this lower duct guide off, so we'll take a T30 bit and remove the 6 screws that hold this on. Now we can slide this forward and remove it. Be very careful not to drop this. There's going to be a lot of debris coming out when we do this. Now it will definitely aid having a second set of hands when doing this. However, we have some ratcheting tethers here that we're just going to use to support this condenser. Those brackets will slide out of these core supports, so we'll just slide them forward. There's one, and then we'll slide the other. All right, we can now pull this out. It's a good idea to drain the remaining of your coolant before transferring this to the table. Now that we have our new radiator and our old assembly on the table, we will have to transfer over some components to this new one. So we will start with a 10mm socket and remove this bolt holding that transmission line on. We do have new seals for these lines included in the kit, but we're just going to remove these from the radiator right now and put them to the side. We already removed that other bolt up top in the vehicle, so we will put that back in the vehicle. We may have to rotate some of these a little bit to get them out. So just pulling it up slightly, rocking it back and forth, this line will come out. And then we can remove this other line here. Grab a flathead screwdriver and pry downwards on this tab, and then pull this radiator fan up a little bit. There's going to be that same tab on the opposite side. And now we can slide these radiator fans up and transfer them over to the new radiator. Now we can transfer over these fans, make sure that all the tabs line up. Then once all the tabs line up, we can push down and clip it in. We have to transfer these radiator mount grommets, and if yours are worn on your vehicle, you can replace them, and those parts are found at fcpeuro.com, and they'll be linked in the description below. But since these are in good condition, we are going to transfer them over to our new radiator. So we're just going to take a flathead screwdriver, work them out, be very gentle not to tear them. Once it's started, we can push from the back side and push this rubber grommet all the way through. Now, when installing these rubber grommets on our new radiator, it's definitely helpful to lubricate it with some glass cleaner to make sure that it slides in nice and easily. All right, we want to make sure that it sits nice and snug in here. There's going to be a little bit of movement, and that's okay. Now, do the same on the other side. Using a T30 bit, we are going to remove the screws on the bottom of these mounts here, and then transfer these over to our new radiator. If these bushings are worn on your vehicle, we have them linked in the description below. Now, these T30 screws are going into plastic, so do not over tighten these. Lastly, we need to transfer over this cap to our radiator. We are going to be reusing this, but if you do decide to replace this, it can be found linked in the description below. We want to be very careful taking this off because we do not want to break the plastic. Inspect our seal here, which the seal looks good. Make sure you hear that audible click. The clip is down, and then it has a firm engaged position. Now, taking our transmission lines that we removed earlier, we can remove the old seals and install the new seals included in the kit. I want to make sure that that seal sits in this groove. So if we need to, we can stretch it a little bit over that ridge and then work it around in that groove with our fingers. Now repeat that process on the other line. We can now take a flathead screwdriver, remove these plugs from the fittings, lubricate the seals, and reinstall the lines. Since we have our transmission fluid here, we're just going to pour a little bit in the cap and use that to lubricate these seals. We'll start with the bottom line first, rotate it slightly, make sure that seal isn't rolling, and then press it in. And then we'll take this small one. Now, before putting this other line in, we are going to want to rotate the top of this line over here, push this down, and slide it in. We can now reinstall this bolt here and tighten this down to 5 Newton meters. You want to be very careful. This does have a metal insert into plastic, and we do not want to strip that plastic. When tightening this, be sure to have it aligned to the bolt hole up top. Now, we don't want to put this top bolt in just yet on these transmission lines because we do need to snake a vacuum line behind it. So we'll do that in the car. Now, before putting this back in the vehicle, let's clean our condenser with some compressed air. I'm going to spend some time to get this as clean as possible, and then we will start installing the new seals on these radiator hoses. Coming to our upper radiator hose, we are going to remove our towel that we had in there to make sure nothing got in there, and we're going to replace this seal. We're going to take our 90-degree pick, get underneath this seal, and remove the old one. Now, included in the kit is going to be 2 new seals, which we have here, and Porsche actually makes a grease for cooling system components, so we're going to use that, and this is going to be linked in the description below. So taking a little bit of that Porsche cooling system grease, we are going to add a couple drops on our new seal here, lubricate that seal, and then install it into the vehicle. Make sure that it sits in the right groove and that it does not feel like it's protruding at all, and it's sitting flush. Included in the kit are new clips, so we're going to push those clips onto the hoses. Now let's do the same on the lower radiator hose. And since we're already here, we can take our coolant drain screw that we removed earlier and thread it back in. This is going into plastic, so we don't want to go super tight with that, but we do not want it to leak. So we're just going to tighten this up by hand. Now, a trick here that we can use to help align these end tanks is using the ratcheting tether to just hold this into place. With our assembled radiator, we can flip it upwards and then slide these lower pins into the core support ends. It may take a couple tries to do this, and we want to be very careful not to tweak the condenser. When sliding these in, it's good to do one at a time. Now we can take our condenser and slide it back into position on our new radiator. So we're going to start with the driver's side first, slide it upwards, get it above the point where it slips in. We want to be very careful not to bend this too much. There we go. We can now go over to the passenger side and repeat that process. Now, with our condenser in place, we can start reinstalling the screws that hold these lower mounts in. We're going to be using an electric screwdriver. These are going into plastic, so don't go crazy tight. Now, to add some more rigidity to this core support, we can slide on this lower air duct. And there is some grooves that it has to slide into. And we want to make sure this foam weather stripping is still there on the lower part of the air duct. And then make sure that foam is pressed in underneath the radiator. Taking these 2 T30 long screws, we are going to thread them into this upper portion here. This is plastic, so don't go too crazy on tightening these, but we're just going to slide that in. snug it up. And then taking the 4 bolts that we removed earlier, we're going to thread them in to this piece from the bottom. Again, this is plastic, so don't go crazy tight. We just want to snug all these up. Taking this guard, we are going to slide it down into position here. Make sure that it lines up with the grooves. You have to snake it around here a little bit. Push it over, make sure that bolt hole lines up, and then over here we are going to clip it in. Now if you remember, this screw snapped in half on us when we took it off, so we have a new one here that we'll be installing, and this screw is linked in the description below. Again, that's going into plastic, so not too tight. Now taking our air guide here, we are going to position it into place and clip it back into the radiator. So we'll start with one side and just make sure it's clipped all in, and then we'll do the other side. Make sure that up top here it is clipped in as well. We can now take our wiring that we set to the side earlier and route it back around the air guide. This harness over here is going to be the horns, so we are going to route that down there. And then coming over here, this electrical connector goes to our pressure sensor switch right there, so we're going to plug that in. And then we're just going to continue to route this all into place. Now taking this window washer line that we removed earlier, we are going to push it back onto this holder here and connect it right here. With this now in place, we can take the foam pieces that we removed earlier and slide them back into place. We want to make sure that they sit nicely, and we do not want to forget these because this helps guide the air. Grabbing these end pieces, starting with the passenger side, we will push this pin down in there, line up the tabs up here, and then push it in up top. Then we can take the electrical connector for the temp sensor and clip it on. Repeat that process on the other side. Now grabbing your horns that we labeled earlier and the bumper, we are going to slide this into place, and we are going to want the foam pieces with these nibs on the end facing downwards. So we'll slide this into position here, and then just make sure that these plastic tabs on the bottom line up. Now, as you can see here, our lines are not lining up. That's why we marked them earlier. So we're going to get a rubber mallet and just tap this into place. Grabbing these brackets attached to the horns, we see this is labeled driver. We're going to thread these bolts in and then thread them from underneath. If those bolt holes do not line up, you can use a pick to get them into position. Grabbing the brackets that we removed earlier, we can start to thread those bolts into the brackets. And you want to do this by hand first, so we do not cross thread this hardware. Using a 13mm socket, we can snug these up, but don't go crazy tight because we might have to adjust it to our marks. Now repeat that process on the other side with the other horn and the other bracket. Now we are just checking our alignment here, and it looks like our bumper needs to go over a little bit that way. So we'll take our rubber mallet here, start to tap that to line it up. With our 13mm socket and our torque wrench set to 20 Newton meters, we can now tighten these 4 bolts. Back underneath here, we want to connect the lower coolant hose. We'll slide our core support forward a little bit so we can reconnect a bunch of connections here. And we already have the clip installed on this hose, so we will just slide it into place. Wait for that click and then give that hose a good tug. Now, since we're here, we can reconnect these fans. This is something that we did when we put this vehicle in service position, but we are currently going to reassemble the vehicle so we get to the point that we can fill the cooling system and top off the transmission fluid. Taking this electrical connector, we are going to plug it back in to this coolant temp sensor on this lower coolant hose. We are going to reconnect these lower boost pipes so we can start the vehicle. Just get a towel, clean it out inside as much as we can. We want this to be a clean area, and we'll also clean this seal. This is a good time to check if this seal is torn, and if this seal is torn, it's a good time to replace it. Using a little bit of engine oil, we can just lubricate this seal, slide it into place, and then reinstall that clip. Once this clip is installed, we will need to make sure that it is clipped in all the way, wait for that click, and then give it a couple tugs. We can take some more engine oil, lubricate inside of this hose, and reconnect it to this pipe right here. With some hose clamp pliers, we can now reposition this clamp into the correct position. On the other side, we can repeat that same exact procedure by connecting these lower boost hoses. Back up top here, we are going to connect this upper coolant hose. So we just slide that on, make sure that clamp is tight. Then we will push all of this vacuum line back into the holder. And then coming over to this side, earlier we did not put that bolt in because we are going to route that vacuum line underneath this transmission line. So we just left ourselves a little room there. And right now we are just loosely reassembling this so we can get to the cooling filling procedure and fill the transmission fluid. With that bolt that we removed up here earlier, we're going to thread it back in and then tighten this down to 5 Newton meters. Taking a little bit of that transmission fluid that we used earlier, we can lubricate the outside of these lines so the fitting slides on a little bit easier. We can also add a little bit of lubrication on the inside here. Now there was a blue sticker here which slid down, which is right here, but the blue line matches the blue line, so we're going to clip that on, make sure it's on nicely, and then do the same with this line. Continuing with partial assembly, we can remove all of our blue shop towels from our intake points, grab our Y-pipe here, reinstall the boot, and then we are going to put this on. On higher mileage vehicles, this plastic insert likes to work its way out, so we can take a rubber mallet and just tap it back in. A dash of glass cleaner can help put this boot on. Now it's easier to snug up this clamp with the intake pipe off, so we're just going to do that now. We'll lubricate these hoses with a little bit of glass cleaner and then slide this back on. This also has a 7mm socket head, so we can use that to tighten this clamp. And we're just snugging this up so we can get the vehicle started. Now we're going to come down here and snug up these lower hoses. We will now reconnect this vacuum line and slide over the clamp to secure it. We will do the same with this hose here. We can grab this electrical connector right here and reconnect it. Now, taking this coolant line that connects right here, we're going to take a little bit of that Porsche grease, put some on this seal here, and then put some on the inside of this fitting and on the outside of this one. You can just spread it around, click this connection on. We want to hear that audible click. There we go. And then we'll clip it on here. We want to secure this radiator back a little bit so we don't run a risk of hitting any of the belts. So we're just going to use a ratcheting tether here. You can use some zip ties or a bungee cord like that, but we just want to wrap it around and then pull this back slightly so it has no chance of hitting those belts. Grabbing our 5-gallon bucket, we're going to place it here and elevate it above the cooling bottle because we want to get the best flow possible. We're going to grab our G40 coolant, open the top, and pour this full gallon into it. We're going to be doing a 50-50 mix on this vehicle. So once we pour all this coolant in here, we're going to grab some distilled water, fill this gallon with distilled water, and then pour it in there as well. You may note that you still have a little bit coolant left in this bucket, and we can use that to top it off later. Now that our cooling system is filled, we can put our cap back on and screw it down tight. Now you'll notice that we have excess coolant in the reservoir right now. That's okay. We want the system to bleed and make sure there's no air bubbles in there, and we're going to show you that later in the video. Since we started the video with the vehicle in service position, we are going to have to reconnect the battery and start the engine for 20 seconds to purge the transmission. Now that we've done that with the engine off, we can get underneath the car with a 10mm Allen and remove the fill plug for the transmission so we can fill it. In our case, we do not need to fill the transmission, but if you do, grab your fluid of choice into one of these syringes like this and fill up until you see a drip just like this. Then you can reinstall the fill plug very loosely, grab a scan tool, and head inside the vehicle. Now with the vehicle running and our scan tool, we're going to go into the computer and select the transmission control module and going to live data to then monitor the transmission temperature. Now this transmission has to be filled from 30 to 50 degrees Celsius or 86 to 122 degrees Fahrenheit. So we're just waiting for our temperature to come up to 86 degrees Fahrenheit, and then we will start filling the transmission again with our fluid and set the level. Now you also want to keep an eye on your engine coolant temperature levels when filling the transmission, since we still have to bleed the cooling system as well. In this case, on our MX-808, we can actually select coolant temperature in the settings so we can look at both while we're filling the transmission. With our transmission temp above 86 degrees Fahrenheit, we can now grab our fluid pump and start to fill the transmission to the proper level. And about 1 liter of fluid will get you filled, so we can take our hose out now and let this come to a drip. Now taking a look here, our transmission fluid has come to a slow drip, so we can take our fill plug, thread it back into the transmission, and then tighten this down to 60 Newton meters. To perform the bleeding procedure, we are going to want to put the vehicle in sport mode, turn the heat all the way up on both sides, and then set the fan position to 1. Next, we want to hold the engine RPM at 2000 for 3 minutes. Let the vehicle return to idle, go underneath the hood, and check both coolant hoses coming out of the thermostat assembly and make sure they are warm to the touch. Be careful, they may be hot. After you verify that the thermostat is opened, you're going to hold the engine RPM again at 2000 for 2 more minutes. Let the vehicle return back to idle. Check that there's heat coming from the vents, which were nice and toasty in here. And then we want to make sure that the engine cooling fans for the radiator activate and turn on. Once everything passes those tests, we can shut the vehicle off, disconnect the battery again, inspect for leaks, and then start reassembling. Before we do final reassembly here, we want to take a flashlight and inspect our transmission lines and cooling fittings to see if we have any leaks, and right now it is clean. So we can start by taking this Y pipe back off and then reassembling the top of this right here. Now taking our upper piece of the core support, we are going to want to slide these mounts into these grooves right here on the core support. So you may have to tilt it down a little bit when sliding it back on. With that slid on, we can grab the pins that hold into that rubber mount and reinsert them. Next, we can take the hood latch, reconnect the electrical connector, and slide them into position. There's going to be one on each side. We can also put this wire holder back into place here. Repeat that procedure on the other side. Now grabbing the 4 long T30 bolts that we removed earlier, we are going to thread them through this lock assembly on both sides into the carrier. You may have to shift it a little bit, and then we are going to just snug these up so we can get our adjustment correctly. Don't go too tight on these right now because we need to move them a little bit. Now, as you can see, all of our lines need a little bit of adjustment, so we can just grab our core support and just shift everything over a little bit. You may have to loosen some things up, but we want to get this alignment as close as it was so our hood can shut nicely. It is important you torque these to specification, because if you go too tight with them, they can actually make the latch not work. Taking these T30 screws that we removed from this section earlier, we're going to thread these back in and then make sure that all of our alignment marks line up. You may have to wiggle this a little bit and stretch it to make sure that alignment goes exactly where we took it off. Once our alignment is good, we can come back with our torque wrench and tighten these down to 10 Newton meters. Grabbing these wings that we removed earlier, we're going to have to take the tape off that we had placed to hold the washers, transfer them behind the bolts, and then thread everything in loosely and align it. With this wing in our hand and the 2 long bolts that we removed, we are going to put them into the holes here, place fingers on both of them, flip it over, and then grab those washers and slide them on. Once we have those washers slid on, we can then slide this into position and thread these bolts in by hand. With those all threaded in, we can grab our other hardware over here, slide this into the groove here, and then thread this hardware in as well. We're going to just run these bolts down so we can align this. It is very important that this wing goes back in the spot that it was removed from, or else nothing is going to line up. With everything aligned here, we can come with our torque wrench set to 10 Newton meters, tighten all of these bolts, and then repeat that process on the other side. Grabbing our active grill strutter, we can place this down here, grab the electrical connector, plug the connector in, make sure that lock is engaged, and then slide this into position. You'll see there's going to be some alignment dowels here to help us get into spot, and they just slide over like that. And then we just want to make sure that this is all lined up down here as well. We can grab those 2 bolts that we removed earlier, thread them back in, and then tighten them down. We want to make sure this is aligned as well. That's why we made those marks. So we're just going to make sure everything lines up and then tighten these down to 10 Newton meters. Taking these 2 T25 screws, we can reinstall them into the spot right here. You may have to push the radiator shutter back a little bit. These are going into plastic, so don't go crazy tight on these. Now taking this wire harness right here, we'll clip it in there and then push the other part of this connector right up here in the bracket by the horn, like that, and then connect the electrical connector portion. Then we can take this air duct, rotate it backwards, and clip it in. Repeat that procedure on the other side. And the last thing we have to do here is push this plastic over the foam here. And that's it. We are back now where we started, in service position. And if you want to see how to take your vehicle in and out of service position, check the video in the description below. But that wraps up this DIY. After you have everything assembled, you want to make sure you check your coolant level again when it's cold. But we can hit the roads now. If you like this video, please be sure to hit that like button. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, drop them in the comments section below. And if you want to see more first generation Porsche Macan videos, click that subscribe button because we have a lot more coming. My name's Cole from FC Puro. Thanks for watching and keep on wrenching.